The train is already moving. Steel wheels grinding against the rails. A deep mechanical roar cutting through the air. The sound grows louder with every second. The camera follows the tracks, stretching into the distance. Empty land, cold metal rails, and far ahead, 5 figures tied across the line. They cannot move. They cannot escape. And the train is coming closer, closer. The ground trembles under its weight. Now the frame shifts. You are standing beside the track, right next to a heavy iron lever fixed to the ground. Your hand is inches away from it. You didn't plan to be here. You didn't expect this moment. But suddenly, the responsibility is yours, because the lever controls the rails. If you do nothing, the train continues forward. 5 people will die. There is no doubt about that. The distance is too short. The speed is too great. But the lever changes everything. If you pull it, the train will switch tracks. The 5 people will live. Their lives will continue. Families will remain whole. Parents will go home. Children will grow up. But the other track is not empty. There is one person tied to the rail there. Just one. One life in place of 5. A simple calculation. 5 lives saved. 1 life lost. The train is seconds away now. The metal vibrates violently. Wind rushes past your face. You have time for only one decision. Pull the lever or leave it untouched. That is the entire question. Would you pull it? Take a moment. Imagine the weight of that choice in your hand. The lever is cold. Your heart is racing. The sound of the train fills your ears. You know what will happen either way. 5 people or 1. Most people, when asked this question, choose to pull the lever. The reasoning seems straightforward. 5 lives are more than 1. Saving more people feels like the correct decision. It feels responsible, logical, even compassionate. But this is only the beginning of the problem. Because the moment you think you understand the answer, the situation changes. Imagine something different. The same train, the same 5 people tied to the track. But this time, you are not standing beside a lever. You are standing on a bridge above the rails. The train rushes toward the 5 workers below. And next to you stands a man, a stranger. He is leaning over the railing, watching the train approach. He has no idea what is about to happen, but you do. And in this moment, you realize something terrible. If that man falls onto the track below, his body will stop the train. The 5 people will live. The train will halt. Their lives will be spared, but the man will die. There is no lever now, no mechanical switch, no safe distance between action and consequence. The only way to save the 5 is to push him. Your hands would be the force that sends him over the railing. Your decision would become his final moment. The math has not changed. 1 life or 5. The numbers are exactly the same. Yet something inside most people resists the action. They hesitate. They step back. They refuse. Even though the result would save more lives. Why? Why does pulling a lever feel acceptable, while pushing a person feels impossible? Why does the same calculation produce two completely different reactions? These questions have troubled philosophers, psychologists, and legal scholars for generations, because they reveal something deeply uncomfortable about human morality. We believe our moral decisions follow clear principles. We believe we know what is right. But when the moment arrives, when responsibility lands directly in our hands, our instincts shift. Logic clashes with emotion. Calculation collides with conscience. And suddenly, the simple arithmetic of life and death becomes something far more complicated. This puzzle is known around the world as the trolley problem. At first glance, it seems like nothing more than a strange thought experiment, a hypothetical question designed to challenge the mind. But the deeper you examine it, the more it exposes the hidden structure of moral judgment. Because the trolley problem is not really about trains. It is about us, about the choices we make when every option carries a cost, about the uncomfortable truth that saving lives can sometimes require destroying one. And this question is not limited to imagination. History has produced moments when real people face decisions disturbingly similar to this. Moments when survival forced individuals to weigh one life against another. Moments when law, morality, and human instinct collided in ways that still provoke debate today. In the late 19th century, a small lifeboat drifted across the open ocean. 4 men had survived a shipwreck. Days passed. Food ran out. Water disappeared. The sun burned above them. Hunger weakened their bodies. Thirst clouded their thoughts. One of them was only a boy, 17 years old, exhausted, feverish, barely conscious. And eventually the others reached a terrible conclusion. One life could save the rest. When they were finally rescued and returned to land, the question followed them into the courtroom. Had they committed murder? Or had they simply done what was necessary to survive? The judges who heard the case faced a version of the same dilemma that philosophers had debated for centuries. Is it acceptable to sacrifice one person if doing so preserves several others? Or are there actions that must remain forbidden, even when survival is at stake? The answers to these questions divide entire schools of moral philosophy. Some thinkers argue that the outcome is all that matters. If an action produces the greatest overall good, then it is justified. Saving 5 lives instead of 1 becomes the obvious choice. Other philosophers reject this reasoning entirely. They argue that certain actions cross a moral line that should never be crossed. Killing an innocent person cannot become acceptable simply because it produces a better result. For them, the value of human life cannot be reduced to numbers. And this disagreement lies at the center of one of the oldest debates in philosophy, a debate that stretches across centuries, a debate that challenges the foundations of justice, law, and moral responsibility. Because if we accept the logic of numbers alone, many disturbing possibilities appear. If one death can save 5 lives, could the same reasoning justify other sacrifices? Would it be acceptable for a doctor to end the life of a healthy patient in order to harvest organs that could save several others? Would a government be justified in sacrificing a few citizens if doing so protected the majority? Would any individual become merely a resource for the greater good? At what point does the pursuit of saving lives begin to threaten the value of life itself? These are not comfortable questions. They challenge the belief that morality is simple, They expose the fragile boundary between compassion and cruelty, and they reveal that the idea of saving lives carries a shadow that many people prefer not to confront, because every act of rescue may contain an unspoken calculation. Who survives and who does not? Tonight, we are going to follow this question wherever it leads, through philosophy, through law, through history, through the psychology of human decision-making. And along the way, you will face several choices of your own, each one revealing something about the way you think, the way you judge, the way you decide who should live and who should die. By the end of this story, you may begin to see morality in a different way, because the problem we started with, the train, the lever, the 5 lives, and the single stranger, turns out to be only the first step into a much deeper puzzle. A puzzle that forces us to ask a difficult question. When lives are at stake, what does justice actually require? And how far should we be willing to go in order to save others? This is the question that has haunted philosophers for generations. The question that divides entire theories of morality. The question that continues to challenge courts, governments, and individuals alike. And it begins with a simple moment beside a railway track. A train racing forward. 5 people tied to the rails. A lever within reach. And the quiet realization that a single decision can determine who survives. Today, we explore the dark philosophy of saving lives. For as long as human beings have told stories, we have tried to understand the choices that define us. Not the easy choices. Not the moments when right and wrong are clearly marked, but the moments when every option carries a cost. Moments when saving someone might require sacrificing someone else. These questions appear again and again throughout history. In courtrooms, in philosophy classrooms, in hospital wards, on battlefields, and sometimes in the quietest places of human life, inside the heart. Because moral decisions are rarely made in isolation. They are tangled with loyalty, with memory, with love. Imagine for a moment that the 5 strangers tied to the track are not strangers at all. Imagine one of them is someone you love, a sister, a brother, a parent, someone whose voice you know by heart, someone whose absence would echo through the rest of your life. The train is still approaching. The lever is still in front of you, but now the choice feels different. Numbers lose their neat clarity. 5 lives against 1 sounds simple when those lives are distant. But morality begins to tremble when those lives gain faces. Names, histories. This is why philosophers have returned to these dilemmas for centuries, because they reveal something unsettling about human nature. We believe morality should follow clear principles. Yet when emotion enters the picture, those principles begin to shift. And love, perhaps more than anything else, has the power to change the weight of a decision. Consider a different kind of moment. 2 people meet by chance. A crowded station platform. A shared glance. A conversation that lasts longer than either expected. At first, they are simply strangers. But slowly, over days, then months, something begins to grow. Late-night conversations. Quiet laughter. The small rituals that form between 2 lives beginning to move toward each other. Love, in its earliest form, often feels fragile. A series of moments that could easily have never happened. A missed train. a different decision, a single change in timing, and everything might have been different. Now imagine that one of those two people is standing beside the railway lever. The train is approaching. 5 lives are tied to the track, but the single person on the other rail is the person they love. Suddenly, the arithmetic collapses. 5 versus 1 is no longer a calculation. It becomes a question of the heart. Would you sacrifice the person you love to save 5 strangers? Or would you refuse, even if that refusal costs 5 lives? Philosophers rarely phrase the question this way, but the emotional truth behind moral decisions often looks exactly like this. Because love changes the landscape of morality. It redraws the boundaries of what we believe we could do. It reshapes the meaning of justice. And sometimes it reveals that our deepest values are not purely logical at all. They are human, complicated, and deeply personal. Throughout history, thinkers have tried to design tests that expose these hidden tensions. Tests that remove the comforting distance between philosophy and real life. Tests that ask people to confront choices they hope never to face. The scenarios you will see today belong to that tradition. For decades, psychologists and philosophers have used them to explore the structure of moral thinking. Universities have asked thousands of students the same questions. Researchers have collected responses from people across cultures and generations. Each answer reveals something about how human beings balance reason, emotion, and responsibility. But statistics alone cannot capture the full weight of these dilemmas. Because behind every hypothetical question lies a deeper truth. Every moral choice affects someone's life, someone's family, someone's future, someone who might have been loved by another person somewhere in the world. This is why the idea of saving lives carries such complicated meaning. To save one person is to preserve an entire network of relationships, memories that will continue, conversations that will still happen, moments that have not yet been lived. And to lose someone is to erase all of that possibility, which is why the central question of this story remains so difficult. What if saving lives requires taking one? At first, the answer seems obvious. Most people believe that protecting the greater number is the responsible choice. Yet, when the situation becomes more personal, when a face replaces a number, our instincts begin to resist. Another question follows closely behind the first. What if justice and morality are not always the same thing? A court may declare an action illegal. Society may condemn it, but individuals living inside desperate circumstances may see the situation differently. They may believe they acted out of necessity, out of love, out of the instinct to protect the people closest to them. And sometimes the law must confront decisions that exist in this uncertain space, situations where survival, loyalty, and morality collide. Even more troubling is the final possibility. What if the choice that appears logical feels completely wrong? What if the mind says one thing, but the heart refuses to follow? This conflict sits at the center of the dilemmas you are about to face. Because today's story is not simply about philosophy. It is about the strange architecture of human judgment. The way we struggle to balance compassion with responsibility. The way love can influence decisions we once believed were purely rational. And the way ordinary people might react when confronted with extraordinary choices. To explore these questions, we will return to 3 moral tests that have shaped decades of philosophical discussion. Each one presents a different version of the same unsettling problem. Each one forces us to examine the limits of our moral beliefs, and each one reveals how quickly certainty can begin to unravel. As the story continues, you will encounter these tests exactly as thousands of others have before you. You will be asked to imagine yourself in each situation, to consider what action you would take, to reflect on the reasons behind that choice. There is no penalty for answering incorrectly, no authority waiting to judge your response, but the outcome may still surprise you, because many people enter these dilemmas confident in their moral clarity, only to discover that their answers shift as the circumstances change. Logic may guide one decision, emotion may guide the next, and somewhere between the two, the boundaries of right and wrong become more difficult to define. So, as we move forward, keep one question quietly in your mind. Not the question of what philosophers believe, not the question of what society expects, but the question of what you would do. Because by the end of this journey through moral philosophy, you may discover something unexpected about your own moral code, something that challenges the way you understand justice, something that reveals the powerful influence of emotion on human judgment, and perhaps something that reminds us all that the act of saving lives is never as simple as it first appears. The first test is waiting, and it begins beside a railway track. The first test begins with the same image we saw before, a railway line stretching into the distance, cold steel rails cutting through the landscape, and somewhere along that track, 5 workers are trapped. They are repairing the line, focused on their work, unaware that danger is already racing toward them. In the distance, the train approaches, heavy, unstoppable. The sound grows louder with every passing second. There is no time for them to escape, no warning that will reach them fast enough. And once again, you find yourself standing beside the lever. It rests there quietly, simple, unremarkable. A small metal handle capable of changing the direction of the train. A small motion of the hand. That is all it takes. If you leave it untouched, the train will continue forward. 5 workers will die. If you pull the lever, the train will shift to the other track. Those 5 workers will live. But someone else is tied to the rail on that second track. One person, only one. The train will strike them instead. 5 lives saved. 1 life lost. The numbers are clear. The arithmetic seems impossible to ignore. So take a moment. Imagine the scene unfolding in real time. The train is close now. The rails vibrate beneath your feet. The wind rushes past. As the engine draws nearer, your hand hovers above the lever, and the question arrives again. What would you do? Would you pull it? Or would you stand still and allow events to continue without interference? Across the world, thousands of people have been asked this exact question. Students in lecture halls, participants in psychological studies, ordinary people invited to consider an extraordinary decision. And the results show a striking pattern. Most people choose to pull the lever. They decide that saving 5 lives is worth the cost of 1. Their reasoning is straightforward. 1 death is better than 5. The outcome protects more people. The greater number survives. From a certain perspective, the decision appears almost inevitable. But something interesting happens when people explain their choice. They rarely describe it as killing someone. Instead, they describe it as saving 5 others. Language softens the decision. Responsibility shifts toward the lives rescued rather than the life lost. In this way, the lever becomes a tool of rescue rather than a weapon. And this kind of reasoning has deep philosophical roots. More than 2 centuries ago, a thinker in England proposed a bold way of judging moral decisions. His name was Jeremy Bentham. Bentham believed that morality should be guided by a single clear principle. Not tradition, not emotion, not instinct, but the measurable consequences of our actions. According to his philosophy, the best action is the one that produces the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of people. Pain should be minimized. Well-being should be increased. And moral decisions should aim toward the outcome that benefits the largest group. This philosophy came to be known as utilitarianism. At its core lies a simple question: which action creates the best overall result? In the case of the railway lever, the utilitarian answer appears obvious. 5 people live. 1 person dies. The total suffering in the world is reduced. The balance of happiness improves. From that perspective, pulling the lever becomes not only acceptable, but morally responsible. For many people, this reasoning feels convincing. It aligns with the instinct to protect as many lives as possible. It reflects the belief that morality should serve human well-being. Yet, even as this logic appears powerful, something else quietly begins to stir in the background. Because human life is rarely experienced as numbers alone. Behind every number is a person, and behind every person is a story. Imagine that the single person tied to the other rail is not anonymous. Imagine you know them. Imagine you once met them on an ordinary afternoon that slowly became unforgettable. Perhaps it happened at a cafe where 2 strangers reached for the same cup of coffee. Perhaps it began with a small conversation that lasted far longer than either of you intended. The kind of conversation where time seems to move differently, where silence becomes comfortable, where curiosity turns into connection. Days pass, then weeks, then months, shared walks through quiet streets, long conversations under dim lights, moments when laughter arrives without effort, the small discoveries that make another person feel increasingly familiar. Their voice becomes part of your daily life. Their presence becomes something you begin to rely on. And without noticing exactly when it happened, affection becomes something deeper. Love grows quietly at first, not through grand gestures, but through countless ordinary moments. A message sent late at night, a memory retold, a hand held during a difficult day, the kind of love that builds slowly until the idea of losing that person feels unimaginable. Now, return to the railway track. The train is still approaching. The 5 workers are still tied to the rails ahead. The lever is still waiting beside you. But the single person on the other track is the one you love. The calculation begins to collapse. Utilitarian mathematics still whispers the same answer. 5 lives outweigh 1. The greater number should survive. Yet the heart resists. Because love transforms a number into a universe. To lose that one person would mean losing everything that exists between you. Every conversation you have shared. Every moment that might still happen. Every future that has quietly begun to form in your imagination. And suddenly, the lever no longer feels like a neutral tool. It feels like a decision that could erase an entire world. This tension between numbers and emotion lies at the center of the trolley problem. Logic pulls in one direction. Love pulls in another. And somewhere between those forces, morality becomes uncertain. Philosophers recognize this conflict. They understand that utilitarian reasoning offers clarity, but human relationships introduce complexity. Because the value of a life cannot always be measured by counting. The person tied to that rail is not merely one life among many. They are someone's child, someone's friend, someone's partner, someone whose absence would leave a silence that nothing else could fill. For the moment, however, the first test remains simple. The lever, the train, the 5 workers, and the single stranger. When people face this scenario in studies and classrooms, most pull the lever. They choose the outcome that saves the greater number. Utilitarian reasoning appears to guide their decision. But the next test will reveal something unexpected, because the same numbers can produce a completely different reaction. The logic remains unchanged, yet the human response shifts dramatically. And when that happens, the neat certainty of utilitarian philosophy begins to crack. The next scenario will force us to confront that contradiction. A situation where saving 5 lives still requires sacrificing 1, but where almost no one is willing to act. And when that moment arrives, we begin to understand that the mathematics of morality may be far more fragile than it first appears. The second test begins in a different place, a bridge, high above the railway tracks. From here, the world looks quieter. The wind moves softly across the metal railing. The ground far below feels distant, almost unreal. But the sound breaks that calm. A train approaches again. The same heavy rhythm of steel against steel. The same unstoppable motion. And once again, 5 workers are trapped on the track ahead. They do not see the danger coming toward them. They continue their work, unaware that within moments, their lives may end. You stand on the bridge, watching the train close the distance. Your mind returns to the lever from before, the decision that felt so simple. 5 lives saved, 1 life lost. A calculation that many people accepted without hesitation. But today, there is no lever, no switch, no mechanical solution separating action from consequence. There is only the bridge, and the man standing beside you. He leans against the railing, gazing down at the track below. A large man, heavy enough that if he were to fall onto the rails, his body would stop the train. The 5 workers would live. The train would halt before reaching them. Their families would never know how close they came to losing someone. But the man beside you would not survive. The distance from the bridge to the tracks is too great. The impact would be fatal. And the only way for that to happen is for you to push him. The math has not changed. 5 lives, 1 life, exactly the same numbers as before. But the feeling of the situation has shifted in a way that is difficult to ignore. Your hands would no longer move a lever. They would move a person. You would feel the resistance of his body, the shock of the moment, the instant when gravity takes over, the sound of the train stopping below, and the silence that follows. So consider the question carefully. You are standing on the bridge. The train is seconds away. The man beside you remains unaware. Would you push him, take a moment. Let the image settle in your mind. Because when researchers ask this question, the results are striking. Almost nobody pushes the man. The vast majority refuse. Even those who pulled the lever in the first scenario often hesitate here. They step back. They choose inaction. 5 lives are lost, but the stranger beside them remains unharmed. This reaction surprises many people at first. After all, the arithmetic has not changed. 1 life still stands against 5. From a purely logical perspective, the answer should remain the same. If sacrificing 1 person was acceptable before, it should be acceptable now. And yet, our instincts say otherwise. Something about this version of the dilemma feels deeply wrong. To understand why, we must look more closely at the experience of responsibility. In the first scenario, the lever creates distance. The action feels indirect. You change the path of the train, but you never touch the person who dies. The tragedy feels like a consequence of circumstances, rather than a direct act of violence. On the bridge, that distance disappears. Your hands become the force that causes the death. The responsibility becomes immediate and personal. This shift changes the emotional weight of the decision. Philosophers often describe 3 elements that make the scenario feel different. The first is direct responsibility. When you pull a lever, you redirect events. When you push a person, you cause their death with your own hands. The second is personal violence. The act requires physical force. It is impossible to ignore the human presence involved. The third is emotional resistance. Our instincts recoil from the idea of deliberately harming someone standing beside us, especially someone who has done nothing wrong. These reactions reveal something powerful about the structure of human morality. We do not judge actions based on numbers alone. We respond to proximity, to intention, to the emotional reality of what it means to harm another person. And love can intensify that response even further. Imagine again the story we began earlier. 2 people whose lives slowly grew closer through chance encounters. The shared coffee, the quiet walks, the conversations that stretched long into the night. Imagine those same 2 people standing on the bridge together. The train is approaching. The 5 workers remain trapped below. And the person leaning on the railing beside you is not a stranger. It is the person whose voice has become familiar. The person whose laughter fills your memory. The person who has quietly become part of your future. If pushing them would save 5 lives, could you do it? This question transforms the dilemma from philosophy into something painfully human. Because love resists the logic of sacrifice. The idea of choosing the death of someone you care about, even for a greater good, feels unbearable. In that moment, the numbers fade. What remains is the simple reality of another human life. Someone who trusted you enough to stand beside you on that bridge. Someone who believed they were safe. The emotional barrier becomes almost impossible to cross, which explains why so many people refuse to push the man. They may accept the logic of saving 5 lives, but they cannot accept the personal act required to achieve it. This contradiction sits at the heart of the trolley problem. The same numbers produce 2 different answers. Logic says the situations are identical. Emotion insists they are not. And somewhere between those 2 forces, our moral instincts begin to reveal their complexity. But even this dilemma does not reach the deepest layer of the problem. because there exists another scenario where the same question appears again. Another situation where saving several lives requires sacrificing one. Except this time, the decision takes place in a setting where life and death choices happen every day. A hospital, a surgeon, 5 patients waiting for organs that could save their lives, and one healthy person who never expected to become part of the calculation. When we arrive there, the tension between morality and survival will grow even stronger. And the question that began beside a railway track will become far more unsettling. Because the next dilemma forces us to confront a possibility that challenges the very foundation of trust in human society. A possibility that many people find impossible to accept, even when it could save lives. The third test moves us away from railway tracks and bridges. This time, the setting is quieter. A hospital corridor, white walls, soft lighting, the distant sound of footsteps echoing along polished floors. Here, decisions about life and death are not unusual. Doctors face them every day. Patients arrive carrying hope, fear, and the fragile possibility of survival. Behind each hospital door is a story, a family waiting, a future hanging in the balance. Now imagine you are not simply walking through this place. Imagine you are the surgeon responsible for 5 of those stories. 5 patients lie in separate rooms, each one desperately ill, each one waiting for an organ transplant, a new heart, a new kidney, a new liver. Without those organs, they will die. Their families know it. The doctors know it. And time is running out. Machines hum quietly beside their beds. Monitors track the slow rhythm of bodies struggling to continue. In the waiting areas outside, loved ones sit with anxious hope. A mother holds her son's hand. A husband watches the door for news. 2 young partners sit together in silence, their fingers intertwined. Their entire future depends on something none of them can control. Because without organ donors, medicine has reached its limit. Now imagine something unexpected happens. A healthy patient walks into the hospital. A routine visit. Nothing serious, just a simple checkup. The kind of appointment people barely think about. Perhaps he is young. Perhaps he laughs easily with the nurse who guides him through the hallway. Perhaps he sends a quick message to someone waiting for him later that evening. Someone who cares about him deeply. Someone who is used to hearing his voice. At the end of the day, maybe their story began years ago. 2 strangers who once met by chance. A shared seat on a train. A conversation that turned into hours. Days into months. Months into something stronger. The kind of love that grows quietly but steadily. The kind that fills ordinary life with meaning. They have made plans together. Small plans. A dinner tonight. A weekend trip next month. Bigger dreams waiting further down the road. All of that continues to exist as the healthy patient signs a form at the front desk. He has no idea that 5 lives in this building depend on organs his body could provide. From a purely medical perspective, the solution appears disturbingly clear. 5 patients need transplants. This healthy visitor possesses everything they require. If those organs were somehow available, 5 lives would be saved. 5 families would celebrate. 5 futures would continue, but there is only one way to obtain them. The surgeon would have to end the life of the healthy patient, quietly, secretly. His heart could go to one person, his kidneys to two others, his liver to another, his lungs to someone who has struggled for breath for years. 5 lives restored, 1 life taken. Once again, the arithmetic looks familiar. 1 against 5. The same calculation we saw beside the railway track. The same balance between loss and survival. So imagine standing in that hospital office, the files of the 5 patients spread across your desk, each one filled with details of lives waiting to continue. Children who still need their parents, partners who cannot imagine a future alone, friends hoping for one more chance. Then imagine the chart belonging to the healthy visitor. Perfect results, a strong heart, healthy organs, a life continuing forward without interruption. The question appears quietly. If ending one life could save 5 others, would you do it? Take a moment. Because when people are asked this question, the response is immediate and overwhelming. Almost everyone refuses. Even those who pulled the lever beside the railway track. Even those who struggled with the decision on the bridge. Here, the answer becomes clear. No. The idea feels unacceptable, disturbing, unthinkable, and yet the numbers have not changed. 1 life sacrificed, 5 lives saved. The same mathematical equation that justified pulling the lever. The same reasoning that seemed logical moments earlier. But the emotional reaction here is far stronger, because the hospital scenario touches something fundamental about trust. Patients enter hospitals believing the people inside are committed to protecting life. Doctors swear an oath to heal, not to harm. To end the life of a healthy patient, even to save others, would shatter that foundation. It would transform the hospital from a place of care into something far more frightening. And once again, love complicates the picture even further. Imagine the person walking into the hospital is the one you love. The person who shares your quiet mornings. The person whose voice steadies you when the world feels uncertain. The one who once stood beside you on a bridge, watching trains pass below. They walk through the hospital doors unaware that their life could become part of a terrible calculation. 5 strangers could survive because of them, but they would never return home. Never finish the plans you made together. Never speak another word to the people who care about them. In that moment, the moral equation becomes unbearable. The numbers remain the same, but the emotional reality overwhelms the logic. This is why the organ transplant dilemma produces such a powerful reaction. It reveals how deeply human beings value individual rights. Even when sacrificing 1 life could save many others, something inside us resists turning a person into a means for someone else's survival. The contradiction grows clearer with each test. Pulling a lever feels acceptable. Pushing someone feels wrong. Ending a patient's life feels unthinkable. And yet every scenario contains the same basic structure. 1 life versus 5. The same balance. The same outcome. So why do these decisions feel so different? Why does the human mind react so strongly to one version of the problem while accepting another? The answer lies somewhere between logic and emotion, between philosophy and instinct, between the cold clarity of numbers and the powerful influence of human connection. And to understand that answer, we must step away from hypothetical dilemmas for a moment. Because history contains a real story where people faced a choice disturbingly similar to these tests. A story that unfolded far from hospitals and railway tracks. A story that began in the open ocean. 4 survivors drifting across empty water. Hunger growing stronger with every passing day. Hope fading beneath an endless sky. And one decision that would follow them long after their rescue. A decision that forced the world to confront the darkest version of the question we have been asking all along. When survival is at stake, how far should anyone be willing to go? The next part of this story is not a thought experiment. No classroom, no philosophical puzzle drawn on a chalkboard. This time, the events actually happened. The year was 1884. A small British yacht named the Immanuel set sail across the open ocean. It was a long journey, the kind that demanded patience and endurance. The sea stretched endlessly in every direction, and the 4 men aboard the vessel knew that once they were far from land, survival would depend entirely on the fragile structure beneath their feet. The crew was small. Just 4 sailors crossing thousands of miles of water together. Among them was the captain, Tom Dudley. Beside him worked the first mate, Edwin Stephens. Another experienced sailor shared the journey. And then there was the youngest member of the crew, a 17-year-old cabin boy named Richard Parker. Richard was young, too young, some might say, for the brutal uncertainty of the sea. But like many boys of that era, he had taken the job hoping to build a future. Adventure called to him, the promise of travel, the chance to earn something for himself. Back home, there were people who cared about him, a mother who likely waited for letters, friends who imagined the distant places he might see. And perhaps somewhere in that quiet English town was a young girl who smiled every time his name appeared in conversation. Someone who believed his life was only beginning. But the ocean is indifferent to human hopes. Far from shore, the weather changed. The sky darkened. Waves rose higher than the fragile hull of the small yacht. Wind struck the vessel with terrifying force. And in a matter of moments, everything collapsed. The mignonette sank. 4 men managed to escape into a small lifeboat. Nothing more than a narrow wooden shell, floating on an endless horizon. When the storm finally passed, silence returned to the sea. The wreckage disappeared beneath the water, and the 4 survivors were left drifting. No land in sight. No rescue ship on the horizon. Only the slow movement of the waves carrying them further into isolation. At first, they believed help would come quickly. Ships crossed those waters regularly. Surely someone would spot them. Surely this suffering would end within a few days. But days turned into longer stretches of time. Their supplies vanished almost immediately. No food. No fresh water. The sun burned down during the day. At night, the cold wind crept across the lifeboat. Their bodies weakened. Their thoughts grew heavy. Hunger became constant. Thirst even worse. After nearly 2 weeks at sea, desperation began to reshape their thinking. They tried to survive on the smallest things. A turtle caught and shared between them. Drops of rain collected when clouds briefly passed overhead. But it was not enough. Their strength faded further, and the youngest among them began to suffer the most. Richard Parker, the boy, had made a terrible mistake early in their ordeal. Driven by thirst, he drank seawater. It only made things worse. His body weakened rapidly. Fever spread through him. Soon, he could barely move. He lay in the bottom of the boat, breathing shallowly. The others watched him grow weaker each day, and slowly, a horrifying idea began to take shape among them. It was not spoken immediately. At first, it existed only in silence, a thought no one wanted to voice. But hunger changes people. Desperation erodes the boundaries that normally guide human behavior. Eventually, the captain spoke. Tom Dudley suggested something sailors had whispered about in survival stories for centuries, a terrible tradition sometimes called the custom of the sea. When survival became impossible, one life might be sacrificed so others could live. In theory, sailors would draw lots, a random choice deciding who would die so the others might survive. But in that lifeboat, no lottery took place. Richard Parker was already unconscious, too weak to resist, too weak even to understand what might happen next. The captain looked at the others. Days had passed without rescue. Their bodies were collapsing. Hope was fading. And finally, he made the decision. He ended the boy's life. The others followed. They consumed the flesh in order to survive. It is difficult to imagine the silence that must have followed that moment. The endless ocean surrounding them. The lifeboat rocking gently with the waves. 3 men alive because a boy had died. Days later, a ship finally appeared on the horizon. Rescue arrived. The survivors were pulled from the water, weak, exhausted, but alive. At first, their survival story spread quietly, another tragic tale from the unforgiving sea. But when the truth of what had happened emerged, everything changed. The men were brought back to England, and there, the law stepped in. The case became known as R.V. Dudley and Stephens. The courtroom filled with debate. Lawyers, judges, and the public struggled with the same question we have been exploring throughout this story. Were these men murderers? Or were they simply survivors who had done what was necessary to live? Their defenders argued that the decision had been unavoidable. Without food, all 4 would have died. Sacrificing one life had preserved 3 others. From a purely numerical perspective, the choice mirrored the logic of the trolley problem. 1 life lost, several lives saved. But others in the courtroom rejected that reasoning entirely. They argued that necessity could not justify killing an innocent person. If survival allowed someone to take another life, then the protection of law would collapse. Anyone might claim desperation as an excuse. Society itself would become unstable. The judges listened carefully. They understood the horror of the situation. They understood the desperation the sailors had faced. But when the verdict finally arrived, it shocked many observers. The court declared the men guilty, even in the face of starvation, even in the open ocean, with no hope of rescue. The killing of Richard Parker was still considered murder. The law had drawn a line, and that line could not be crossed, no matter how desperate the circumstances. The decision echoed far beyond the courtroom, because it forced the world to confront the darkest version of the question we have been asking all along. When survival demands a sacrifice, who gets to decide whose life is worth less? Was the captain a criminal who took advantage of a dying boy? Or was he a man who made an impossible choice in order to save the others? History still debates the answer, but the court's judgment was clear. The law would not allow the value of a life to be determined by desperation, even when 3 men survived because of that choice. And somewhere in the background of that story remains the quiet tragedy of Richard Parker, a 17-year-old boy who left home believing his life was just beginning. A boy whose future might have included love, family, and a long life on land. A future that disappeared in the middle of the ocean, because in the struggle between survival and morality, someone had to lose. The question that remains for us now is simple. If you had been in that lifeboat, hungry, thirsty, and certain that death was approaching, what would you have done? Would you have accepted the captain's decision? Or would you have refused, even if it meant everyone might die? The court believed it had answered that question. But philosophers were far from satisfied, because behind this case lies a much larger conflict. A conflict between two powerful ways of thinking about morality. Two philosophies that offer completely different answers to the problem of saving lives. And understanding that conflict may reveal why our instincts reacted so differently to every dilemma we have seen so far. The lifeboat eventually reached land. The ocean released its survivors. But the question it left behind refused to disappear. Inside courtrooms, universities, and private conversations, people continued asking the same unsettling thing. Was the captain's decision an act of survival, or an unforgivable crime? The answer depends on how someone understands morality itself, because behind every judgment lies a philosophy about how human life should be valued. And over the last few centuries, two very different philosophies have stood in quiet opposition to one another. Two ways of thinking about justice. Two ways of deciding whose life must be protected, and at what cost. The disagreement between them forms one of the deepest debates in moral philosophy. On one side stands a man who believed morality should be guided by outcomes. On the other stands a thinker who believed morality must obey rules that cannot be broken. The first was Jeremy Bentham. The second was Immanuel Kant. Their ideas still shape the way people argue about justice today. And if you listen carefully, you can hear their voices inside every dilemma we have explored so far. Bentham's voice speaks in the language of results. Kant's voice speaks in the language of principles. And somewhere between those two voices, humanity continues to struggle with the meaning of morality. Jeremy Bentham lived in England during the late 18th century. He looked at the legal systems and moral traditions of his time and found them confusing. Laws often seemed arbitrary. Punishments were inconsistent. Moral rules appeared to rely on ancient customs rather than clear reasoning. Bentham believed there had to be a better way. So he proposed something radical. Instead of relying on tradition or emotion, morality should be measured by its consequences. Every action produces outcomes. Some outcomes increase happiness. Others create suffering. If we want to judge whether something is morally right, Bentham argued, we should ask a simple question. Does this action increase overall happiness in the world? If the answer is yes, the action moves in the right direction. If the answer is no, it moves in the wrong direction. From this idea emerged the principle that became the foundation of his philosophy: the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Bentham believed that the moral choice is the one that produces the best outcome for the most people, not the outcome that benefits a single individual, not the outcome that follows tradition, but the outcome that maximizes well-being across the largest group. In a world guided by this principle, decisions would become clearer. If sacrificing one life could save 5, the choice would be justified. The total happiness created by saving 5 people outweighs the suffering caused by losing one. From Bentham's perspective, This reasoning is not cruel. It is compassionate on a larger scale. Because morality, in his view, should aim to reduce suffering wherever possible. Saving 5 people instead of 1 reduces suffering. Preserving more lives creates more happiness. The calculation may be painful, but the outcome benefits the greater number. In this way of thinking, the captain in the lifeboat becomes easier to understand. 3 men survived. 1 life was lost. Bentham's philosophy would ask whether that sacrifice increased the total chance of survival. If it did, the decision might appear morally defensible. And this same logic echoes through the trolley problem. Pulling the lever saves more lives. The balance of happiness improves. The numbers favor action. But as convincing as this reasoning may sound, another voice rises to challenge it. A voice that speaks from a very different vision of morality. Immanuel Kant lived in Germany during the 18th century. Unlike Bentham, Kant believed morality should not depend on outcomes, because outcomes are uncertain. They change, and they often lie beyond our control. Instead, Kant believed morality must be grounded in principles that remain constant. Principles that apply to everyone. Principles that cannot be broken simply because breaking them might produce a better result. For Kant, the most important principle was respect for human dignity. Every person possesses value that cannot be measured or traded. A human being is not an object, not a tool, not a resource that can be used to achieve someone else's goal. From this belief emerged one of the most famous ideas in moral philosophy. Kant called it the categorical imperative. At its heart lies a powerful instruction. Human beings must never be treated merely as a means to an end. In simpler terms, this means that no person should be used as a tool for someone else's benefit, even if doing so might produce a good outcome, even if many people might gain something from it. Because once we allow individuals to become instruments for the greater good, the value of human life begins to collapse. Consider the organ transplant dilemma again. 5 patients need organs. 1 healthy visitor possesses them. A utilitarian calculation might suggest sacrificing the healthy patient, but Kant would reject that reasoning immediately. Ending that person's life would treat them as a tool for the benefit of others. It would reduce their existence to a resource. And for Kant, that action violates the fundamental dignity of human life. The same principle appears in the bridge scenario. Pushing the man onto the tracks uses his body as a means of stopping the train. His life becomes a device for saving the others. Kant believed that such an action could never be morally justified, because once we allow people to be used this way, no one's safety remains secure. Every individual becomes vulnerable to being sacrificed whenever others might benefit. And that world, Kant believed, would destroy the foundation of moral society. Now imagine how this philosophy views the story of the lifeboat. 4 men drifting across the ocean. Hunger tightening its grip. Hope fading with each passing day. The captain decides that one person must die so the others can live. Bentham's philosophy might weigh the outcome. 3 survivors instead of 4 deaths. But Kant's philosophy looks at the act itself. The boy was used as a means of survival. His life became a tool for the others. And according to Kant's principle, that action remains morally wrong regardless of the circumstances. This disagreement between Bentham and Kant reveals something fascinating about human judgment. When we pulled the lever beside the railway track, many of us followed Bentham's logic. Saving 5 lives seemed like the responsible choice. But when we imagine pushing a man from the bridge, Kant's principle suddenly felt more convincing. Something inside us resisted turning another person into an instrument of survival. Our instincts shifted. Logic gave way to emotion. And the invisible boundary between acceptable action and moral violation appeared. Even love itself reflects this tension between the two philosophies. Love rarely follows numerical calculations. When someone loves another person deeply, they do not measure that relationship against a list of strangers. They do not ask whether sacrificing the person they love might benefit a larger group. Love recognizes the individual as irreplaceable. A single life becomes an entire universe of meaning, and that emotional reality mirrors Kant's idea of human dignity, the belief that every person possesses value that cannot be traded away. But society often demands decisions that resemble Bentham's calculations. Governments allocate resources. Doctors decide how to distribute limited treatments. Leaders weigh the safety of many against the sacrifice of a few. In these situations, the logic of maximizing overall benefit becomes difficult to ignore. And so the two philosophies continue their quiet struggle. Bentham asking us to consider the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Kant reminding us that every human life deserves respect that cannot be compromised. Both perspectives offer powerful insights. Both attempt to guide humanity toward a more just world. Yet neither completely resolves the dilemmas we have been exploring. Because real life rarely presents choices that fit neatly within a single theory. Instead, we find ourselves caught between compassion for the many and loyalty to the individual, between the desire to protect society and the refusal to sacrifice someone we love. And it is in that uncertain space, between numbers and dignity, between logic and love, that the deepest moral questions continue to live. The dilemmas we have examined so far are not simply puzzles designed to entertain philosophers. They are mirrors reflecting the complicated structure of human morality. They show us how quickly certainty dissolves when life and death enter the equation. And they reveal that the act of saving lives may carry a cost that no philosophy can completely erase. But even this conflict between Bentham and Kant does not fully explain our reactions, because something else is happening inside the human mind. Something older than philosophy. Something shaped by evolution, emotion, and instinct. A hidden process that quietly influences the way we respond to every dilemma we have seen. To understand why pulling a lever feels acceptable while pushing a person does not, we must look beyond philosophy itself. We must look inside the human brain. The tension you feel during these dilemmas is no accident. Your mind is built with two powerful, often conflicting systems. One system seeks clarity and calculation, logical reasoning. It evaluates numbers, probabilities, and outcomes. It asks, what maximizes survival? What produces the best overall result? This is why, when confronted with the trolley switch, many people pull the lever. The math is simple. 1 life versus 5. Logic favors action. But the second system is different. It is older. Emotional morality. It reacts to human presence, to touch, to responsibility. It senses danger not just to yourself, but to others nearby. It alarms when someone is harmed directly by your hands. It flares when betrayal or personal violence threatens the bonds you depend on. This system ignites during the bridge scenario. Standing above the tracks, next to a person whose life you could take, your brain reacts. Your hands hesitate. Your heart pounds. Your instincts recoil. Direct action against another human being triggers ancient survival mechanisms. Our ancestors survived because their brains avoided unnecessary aggression toward those in their social group. Avoiding direct violence preserved trust. Avoiding betrayal maintained cohesion. Avoiding harming others personally protected relationships, essential for survival. These instincts remain embedded in us today. Even when a logical calculation would suggest one choice, emotional morality can override reason. This is why pushing the man on the bridge feels far worse than pulling a lever, even though the outcome is mathematically identical. And love intensifies the conflict. Imagine the person on the bridge is someone you care for deeply, a partner whose laughter has become essential to your days, a voice that has calmed you through storms, both literal and figurative, someone whose future is entwined with yours. Logic may still calculate the survival of 5 lives, but emotion screams, not them. The calculations of the brain clash with the instincts of the heart. This is why morality can feel terrifying. Saving lives is no longer a clear choice. It becomes a conflict between what your mind calculates and what your instincts demand, between duty to many and loyalty to the individual. And in this collision, we begin to understand something fundamental. Moral reasoning is never purely rational. It is never purely emotional. It is a negotiation between logic and instinct, mathematics and love, survival and empathy. And only by acknowledging that tension can we start to see why choices about life and death are profoundly unsettling. Because sometimes doing the right thing is impossible to define. And sometimes the person whose life matters most is also the one whose life you are least willing to sacrifice. Now it's time to turn the question to you. After everything we've explored, the lever, the bridge, the hospital, and even the lifeboat, here comes the moment that will reveal something about your own moral instincts. If killing one person could save 5 lives, would it be justice or murder? Take a moment. Let it sink in. Imagine the faces of the 5 you could save. Imagine the face of the one whose life you would take. The calculation is simple. The emotion is overwhelming. And now, I want to hear from you. Comment below. Save 5. If you would sacrifice one life to save the others, never kill. If you believe taking a life is always wrong, no matter the outcome, don't overthink it. Go with your first instinct. There is no easy answer here. No right or wrong choice. That applies to everyone. What matters is what your reaction tells you about how you weigh logic, instinct, and empathy. Because morality isn't just about rules. It's about the tensions, the conflicts, and the difficult choices that define what it means to be human. And the debate starts with you. And now, as we come to the close of this journey, slow down and reflect. Most of us go through life believing we understand morality. We teach it, debate it, and measure others by it. But the moment survival presses against us, everything we thought we knew can crumble. A pause. The truth is unsettling. The line between justice and cruelty is thinner than we think. Between saving lives and committing murder. Between doing what seems right and following our instincts. Between logic, love, and the raw force of circumstance. It is in those rare, impossible moments that our true moral selves are revealed. Not in theory, not in discussion, but in action. And so, the real question isn't what you believe today. The real question is, what would you do when your life depends on it?